Joins us now by phone to discuss this and much more. Congressman, we thank you for joining us, first of all. I wanted to get your reaction to the court denying this emergency request to resume the travel ban. What do you think?
Well, Morris, thanks. And I was a bit surprised that on the second round, when they had a chance to take a deep breath and read the statute and understand the constitutional authority that exists for the President of the United States, that it wasn't just simply a vacation of that they didn't just vacate the initial court order. As I think it was Mike Pence's voice, so I wasn't able to see the name, when he said there's simply no question that the President has this authority. I absolutely agree. And in fact, this is an affront to the United States Congress, who writes the laws and all of the laws, and they have granted this authority to the President of the United States. The President, and by directly from the statute, whenever the President finds that the entry of any aliens or any class of aliens would be detrimental, he may, by proclamation, and for such period of time as he may deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. But that can't be any more clear. Congress has entrusted this because we know the executive branch is the only branch that can move quickly enough to protect us in time of danger. And it's the President's judgment and discretion that's been granted, that authority has been granted to him by Congress. It couldn't be more constitutional.
Congressman, just about a year ago, some of President Obama's executive orders were struck down by a judge in Texas. And at the time, Donald Trump said the courts did the right thing. So what's different in this situation?
Well, then, I'm just going to say it straight out. Donald Trump was wrong on that from our constitutional perspective. And I'm not sure where his counsel came from to take such a position, but I know those cases, and I was involved in them. And in fact, I organized the very first meeting to litigate the DACA issue. It was an issue that came from Barack Obama. Barack Obama didn't think they were constitutional. He told us 22 times in video that he didn't have the constitutional authority to do what he did with DACA. And yet he decided that he had the power, the political power, that would overrule the Constitution itself. And so that threw us into a conundrum. But it's clear to me that President Obama granted an amnesty to a huge class of people that were defined to have come into America before they were 18 years old, however illegally they arrived or stayed. And he knew he didn't have the authority. And the courts didn't grant standing to an American citizen or a governor on the same basis that they granted standing out of the states of Minnesota and Washington for this issue that barely has any impact whatsoever on either one of those states.
Now, Representative, I do have to ask you about something else that the President said that is making news. Three fellow congressmen, specifically three Republican senators, came out today harshly against Donald Trump's assertion that the United States is morally equivalent to Russia. He said that our country isn't so innocent when Bill O'Reilly called Vladimir Putin a killer. I want you to listen to what Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Senator Ben Sasse had to say.
Okay.
Putin's a former KGB agent. He's a thug. He was not elected in a way that most people would consider a credible election. The Russians annexed Crimea, invaded Ukraine, and messed around in our elections. No, I don't think there's any equivalency between the way the Russians that conduct themselves and the way the United States does.
I'll be honest, I don't know what the president's trying to do with statements like he allegedly has on O'Reilly on the Super Bowl tonight. So I've only seen little clips of it. There may be a broader context, but let's be clear. Has the U.S. ever made any mistakes? Of course. Is the U.S. at all like Putin's regime? Not at all. The U.S. affirms freedom of speech. Putin is no friend of freedom of speech. Putin is an enemy of freedom of religion. The U.S. celebrates freedom of religion. Putin is an enemy of the free press. The U.S. celebrates free press. Putin is an enemy of political dissent. The U.S. celebrates political dissent and the right for people to argue free from violence about places where our ideas are in conflict. There is no moral equivalency between the United States of America, the greatest freedom-loving nation in the history of the world, and the murderous thugs that are in Putin's defense.
Congressman, I also want to read you a tweet from Marco Rubio earlier today. He wrote, quote, "When has a Democratic political activist been poisoned by the GOP or vice versa? We are not the same as Putin." Congressman, what's your reaction to this? Whose side are you on? Do you believe that Donald Trump is right in his assertion that we're morally equivalent to Russia?
I think there's been some overreaction on both sides of that argument. One, when I saw the video of President Trump's response to that question, I thought that his first is the implication, and I don't think his words came out very well, were that the orders that come down from the leadership of any country often result in life or death events that result from that. And the moral equivalency, I agree, there's not a moral equivalency between the United States and Russia. Although when I listened to one of the senators, when he said that Putin is against freedom of religion, he's actually been opening things up for the expansion of especially the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia. And I know that helps him politically, but there's more freedom of religion there than there used to be. They're not much for freedom of the press, but dissent. I would say Gary Kasparov has long, now he's in the United States. He lived a long time in Russia with a very loud megaphone of dissent against the regime, and he's still alive and well. So I think there's something to be learned on either side of this, but all in all, I wish that the president hadn't made that remark, because it implies that there's a thought in his mind that there's a moral equivalency between us and Russia. And at this point, I'd like to bring them up to our standards and say, welcome to that club, but it's going to take a lot of years to get that done. And I would add that it's important that the president do work with Putin and Russia and planning together on how we defeat radical Islamic terrorism.
Now, I do have to ask, if President Trump continues to defend Vladimir Putin, could this ultimately backfire, especially when you have the ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, telling the United Nations that the global community has to step in and do more to help Ukraine? Is Trump in danger of alienating not just perhaps his voters, but also the people that he hired to be part of his team and his administration?
It sounds to me that the positions that have been taken by the people he's hired to be part of the team, including Nikki Haley, are delivering a pretty good foreign policy message. And I'll say the implied contradiction in the statements of President Trump might be where some of the trouble comes from. But he's got good people in place, and Donald Trump has played a complex gambit in the art of the deal. And so I'd say let's see how this comes out. I have, and with regard to the KGB, or now the FSB, when I heard this on tape, it flashed back in my mind. Not that long ago, I sat at a table in Russia with the numbers 2, 3, and 4 of the Russian FSB, which are the successor to the KGB, where Putin essentially grew up into politics. And I remember looking into their eyes and asking myself the question, how many people did they have to kill to get this job? No, I think there's some bad people over there, and they reach worldwide. They have a presence on the streets of the United States that sometimes gives us more intel than we have ourselves. So it's a very, very complex thing, and Trump has access to the best briefings that anyone in the world has right now. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and just say the inflection of his voice and the implication was unfortunate, but I think he's a wiser man on this policy than many of his critics give him credit for.
All right, Representative, we do have to ask you one more thing, another bit of news that came from that interview with Bill O'Reilly. Donald Trump, again, reiterating this claim that the voter fraud situation in this country is a really bad situation. I want you to listen to this.
Is there any validity to the criticism of you that you say things you can't back up factually? And as the president, if you say, for example, that there are 3 million illegal aliens who voted, and then you don't have the data to back it up, some people are going to say that's irresponsible for a president to say that. Is there any validity to that?
Many people have come out and said I'm right. You know that.
I know, but you got to have data to back that up.
Let me just tell you, when you see illegals, people that are not citizens, and they're on the registration rolls. Look, Bill, we can be babies, but you take a look at the registration. You have illegals, you have dead people, you have this. It's really a bad situation. It's really bad.
Now, sir, you've been supportive of the president's claim. At one point, you said that there could be roughly 2.4 million illegal votes cast in the last election. A slew of fact checkers have said there's no basis for that claim. Lawmakers in your own party, the Speaker of the House, have said that there's zero evidence of this claim. Today, Mitch McConnell said that the federal government shouldn't dedicate any money to an investigation into these claims. Is it time for the President of the United States to give conclusive evidence for voter fraud? It's a claim that he's continued making Is it time for him to present these facts that he says he has?
Well, I don't know if it's time. It's time to begin an investigation. He's called for that, and I think he'll follow through with that, and we'll find out what the information is. But and maybe this sounds a little critical of leadership in the Congress, but for anyone to say that there's zero evidence, what can that possibly mean? How would they have been able to scan all information available and come to the conclusion that it's completely devoid of any evidence whatsoever? It might be they are not aware of any, or they don't want to admit to any evidence. Now, for me, I have watched this issue intensively. I got focused on it a lot in the year 2000 when the presidency was decided by the court, but ultimately by 537 votes in the state of Florida. And I scoured everything that I could find. I spent all of those days digging into elections and to write Iowa law. And I was in the state Senate at the time. I found a lot of fraud and narratives of fraud and people that investigated fraud. The Collier brothers wrote a book on it. John Fund has written a book, at least one, on it. And I said that I took the data that was available in the surveys that took place primarily in Virginia and just did a little calculation and came up with what was it was a calculation that produced. I didn't say it straight out. It was an extrapolation that said, what could the scope of this be if what we've seen in the surveys of the people who confessed to being illegals who were voting in the state of Virginia, if you extrapolate that across the country, given the data that's available, what could we conceivably be talking about? And I came with a number of 2.4 million. I did that well before President Trump made his remarks. So, and by the way, in defense of extrapolations, polling is an extrapolation, and TV ratings are extrapolations.
Sure,
Bill O'Reilly's ratings are extrapolations. And so I think that's in the zone. Let's go find out with some more solid data. It's too important to turn a blind eye to it. And I've been completely convinced when I've tried to clean up the voter process by law, the people who stood against me, their vigor and their frustration and their anger was so great, they convinced me that they had a vested interest in voter fraud. So let's find out. I'm all for it, and let's be objective as we go forward.
Sure, but just to be clear, Congressman, very quickly, the surveys that you referenced, were those of voter rolls, or were those of actual people that said that they voted in the election illegally?
These were surveys of people. As I recall, they were exit polls, but people who confessed that they were illegal and they had voted, and they just simply asked them, and they told the truth. And these numbers were shaken down from those who confessed that they were illegal and had voted. And I'd be convinced that you take a universe of illegals who voted, not half of them would admit that they were illegal or that they voted. And so, I don't. That factor is not factored in as far as I know. So I think we should be a little open-minded about this. It's just impossible to conceive the idea that you would register people under motor voter, ask them if they want to register to vote. They say yes, and then we've tightened things up here in Iowa a little bit, but it's not been that tight in many places across the country. And so if they say yes, go ahead and register me to vote, they think that they're legal to vote. And if they go to the polls and vote, they're encouraged to do so by some of the groups out there. It's hard to believe that there wouldn't be illegals voting in America. And I would make this point to my Iowa Secretary of State, who will be right on top of this, I'm sure. But I've made this statement in the past that I could go vote in each of the 99 counties in Iowa, and at this point there's nothing they can do about it. That's how loose. This is the honor system all across America. And there are places where, say New Mexico, for example, if I were working the voting booths as one of the poll workers, and someone walked in and said they were Steve King, I would be compelled to hand them my ballot, and I could not challenge them, even if they asserted they were me, according to the laws of New Mexico. And by the way, that comes from under oath from the Secretary of State of New Mexico before the United States Congress.
All right, Representative King calling out the leadership of his own party, saying that they don't really know what they're saying when they say that there's zero evidence out there when it comes to voter fraud. The president did say over a week ago that he would call for an executive order that would investigate fraudulent voting. It has not happened. Congressman King, we are out of time. Thank you so much for your time on this Super Bowl Sunday, sir.
Thank you, Boris. I appreciate it.
Yeah. When we come back, while the president's travel ban is suspended,